Angela Anderson, welcome to 2020 Revision.
Thanks, Ralph. Angela, that's very formal. A lot of people call me Ange, but Angela, I feel like I'm in trouble.
Now, you're the breakfast newsreader on Nova in Brisbane. You're also a marriage celebrant. Can you take
Yes.
me through your 2020?
It's been different, very interesting. I know a lot of people say we spoke about, what we envisaged 2020 to be like. It was definitely not going to be like this. And New Year's, we're like, new decade, let's do this. But yeah, March hit us as a celebrant, and I did my second wedding of the year, and it was my last wedding until I think it was July that I then did my next wedding, which was quite full on because that is actually the wedding season, was when it starts in March. So we had a lot of couples deciding that they couldn't simply go ahead. So whether they were going to cancel their wedding altogether or whether they were going to postpone, and when they were going to postpone, it was just really uncertain for them because of all the restrictions that were in place. So yeah, it was quite hard. It was a lot of juggling, a lot of patience needed. Especially when you're working with people who, are talking about getting married, which is a very emotional thing. And a lot of people are very invested in it, not just, emotionally, but financially as well. So yeah, it was a tough year managing expectations as well as a small business. And I've only been doing this for 2 years. So it's a relatively new business, but I knew that I wanted to just be there for the couples and make sure that what I was doing was the best for them. So the wedding industry is quite, interesting because it is quite a lucrative industry. There's, people do charge a lot of money to do their job within the wedding industry. But yeah, I was mainly just focused on making sure that the couple's needs were met, which yeah, is where I guess you just have to think, you have to put yourself in their perspective. And I like to think that whoever I was working with as my vendor, I'd like them to have a heart, basically, because, this is unprecedented times. We've never seen, that there's that word again, unprecedented. We've heard it so many times, but yeah, we were working with something that we'd never come across before. And yeah, I just wanted to make sure, as I said, that I just, was looking out for the couples and their best interests were met.
So how was that period during the shutdown, and also like in the lead up to it, where there was so much uncertainty, the regulations, as you mentioned, were coming in and things were changing so quickly. Did you have a mixture of people were, just straight out looking to postpone? Some were unsure. Were they coming to you? How did it all sort of unfold from that point of view when, as you said, it's an emotional time getting married?
I think a lot of people, they either knew that they wanted to postpone because they were just so uncertain about what the future was. But there was other people that were coming to me saying, what do you think? And I mean, that's a really hard question to ask your vendor, your celebrant, because I don't have a crystal ball, and it was really hard to know what to say to them. So I just said, I think you should talk to all the people that are involved in your wedding. I'm happy to do whatever you want. I even gave a few refunds over that time because people just didn't know what they wanted to do. But yeah, it was just really hard navigating that when people were coming to you asking for your opinion, because there was a few people that I said, I think this will be over in a couple of months, but I don't know. and it's still going now. So as restrictions here in Queensland, we were very fortunate, we're being relaxed. We were seeing people, go ahead with their weddings, but, weddings have changed now. They're so different to what they were beforehand. I think people are now starting to get more of a perspective on what a wedding is, and it's not entirely just about your guests. It's about, the two of you getting married, and you don't have to have your 150 plus guests there just to make, your nan happy that your cousins, that you've only met, 4 times are going to be there. So I think people are really just starting to get a perspective and the bigger picture of what weddings should be.
So if you look at it, when you were going through that period, were you concerned about that side of your business? Obviously, with the uncertainty of not knowing when restrictions were going to be eased, when people were going to come back through the door, if they were going to continue to use your services. I mean, that in itself, when you're trying to establish something like you are, must also be a bit of a stressful period.
Yeah, it was very stressful. It was stressful too in terms that, you know, you are running a business, so it is about the money, but at the same time, you want to uphold the reputation of your business. So I was finding it hard in the fact that it was a lot of work dealing with, you know, so many emails in your inbox, yet the money wasn't coming in. So it was quite hard. And being a small business, I've kind of, you know, not really established myself in terms of the bookkeeping side of things. So I didn't, you know, apply for any of the government grants, but I know a lot of my colleagues did, and that helped tremendously so they could keep themselves afloat. And I guess too, I'm very fortunate in the fact that I have a, you know, another job. So, and that was, you know, quite stable over that period. But yeah, it was a lot of work. Again, just managing expectations, and then also, yeah, looking out for myself too, because everything was up in the air for probably a good 3 months. And yeah, just making sure that I was going to be able to actually meet what they wanted me to do later on down the track as well. I didn't want to leave anybody hanging in terms of, you know, they're not going to have a celebrant because I've double booked later on or something like that. So yeah, it was really tricky for a while, and I was spending hours at the computer just responding to people. And yeah, it was just very emotional from their point of view. So yeah, it was very tricky managing a business versus, you know, something that's, you know, you do once in a lifetime. So yeah, I don't want to go back there, that's for sure.
So when things were starting to get back to, I don't want to say normal, but somewhere near normal, and the booking started again and people realised what they could do, how important was it for you to make sure that you were up to date with all of the guidelines and being able to answer the questions that people had when they're still wanting to sort of push ahead, but they want to do it in a COVID friendly way?
Well, it's funny because some couples knew restrictions were, yet they were pushing the limits because they wanted it to be different. So I had to be all over the restrictions because there's big fines, especially here in Queensland. Our restrictions were relaxed a lot sooner than other states. And we were seeing weddings go ahead with a maximum of 20 people. Then, you know, 2 weeks later it would be 40, and then we'd jump to 100. So just keeping on top of those dates and knowing exactly when we were allowed to do that, I had to make sure that I was all over that, because there was health inspectors going around to weddings and making sure that we're adhering to that. And then if the couples had invited more people than they said they had, it fell on me basically. So we really had to, you know, form that mutual understanding, that mutual respect and trust with my couples, so that we were making sure we were adhering to all the COVID regulations. So it was just absolutely imperative that I stayed on top of everything, which was a lot because it was changing quite often, and it was changing immediately sometimes, and then other times it would change, you know, they would make an announcement and then 3 days later it would change. So it was staying on top of exactly, yeah, when the change was happening, not just what the change was. So yeah, it was very tricky industry to be in at that time too, because yeah, you are dealing with people who, you know, they want, you know, their 100+ guests to be there, but they simply couldn't. So they had to, you know, then cut their guest lists and stuff like that. And then we had things like you've never seen before, where you're turning up to a wedding and you have to, they're all your friends and family. They had to sign a register with their name and, you know, what time they were entering the wedding. It was just bizarre, really.
So I guess, as opposed to some of your colleagues in that industry, you did have it a bit of an advantage. You mentioned your other job there. You're the newsreader at Nova in Brisbane on the breakfast show. So I guess that would have been advantageous because you had to be across detail, not only in your own industry, but what's happening in your state, what's happening around the country, and also around the world.
Yeah, which actually made it really hard for me personally, because I knew a lot of my colleagues, for example, in Melbourne as marriage celebrants, because you make friends, you know, throughout the country in this industry. They were doing it really tough. So then you're really conscious as to what you're posting on social media too, because you know that you don't want to gloat too much, like, oh, I did this wedding the other day and it was brilliant, because, you know, they're really struggling and they're struggling financially as well. So I found that really tough, being across absolutely everything, across, you know, the whole country, because of that reason. Yeah, it was tough to not seem like, you know, you're succeeding while someone else is really struggling. But yeah, it's been an interesting year in news, that's for sure. And it's been so busy. So yeah, although everyone's saying 2020, it was, you know, I've got a lot of friends who are out of work, friends who have lived overseas that have moved back, and they're all saying 2020, oh, let's just, you know, forget about it. What a year. I sat on the couch most of it while ScoMo paid for my lifestyle. But for me, it's been huge. It's, you know, as I said before, that marriage celebrant business, you know, dealing with all that, then having to wake up and be across absolutely everything in the news. It's been, I'm looking forward to a break.
Yeah, absolutely. So from your point of view, so take me through that. Did you have to work from home for a period? Did you, were you able to go into the office? How did it work with the breakfast show that you're working on with Ash, Kip, Lutzi and Susie O'Neill?
We, I think, were one of the only breakfast shows in Nova Entertainment that decided to stay in the studio. So we all made a pact, basically, that we were just going to go between home and the studio and not make any contact with, you know, the outside world, really. We're just in our own little bubble before the bubbles were created, like the NRL.
A Nova bubble.
Yes, and we all had our temperatures taken when we got to work. But yeah, we were still operating out of the studio, just because that's the way that we feel that we work best. So seeing each other, you know, picking up the vibe, it's just a little bit harder down the line, I think, and doing it virtually, because I think we all gel together and we build that rapport through seeing each other. But yeah, it was weird. You know, the roads were so quiet driving to work, and you know, you'd stop and you'd go to your local coffee shop for your morning coffee and it wouldn't be open. Like, I mean, that sounds so precious, but it was just those little things that you're like, actually, yeah, the world, like, while our world is still going, as it always has been, it's not normal for everybody else. And I think, yeah, that's when it really hit, when everybody was staying at home and we were going in.
So did you talk a lot through that period as a team, like in terms of that very uniqueness that you were doing something that not everybody was allowed to do? Yeah,
we did. If I'm completely honest, I think some of us saw it as, oh, cool, let's do our jobs and go home, because that's what everyone else is doing. But yeah, we did. And sometimes you did feel like a bit of a rebel, because we did have to have those letters from the company in our cars, you know, in case we were stopped by the police, to say that we are essential workers. And we started to laugh amongst ourselves, saying, you know, we're not an essential worker. Essential workers are your doctors, your nurses, and, you know, your healthcare providers. So it felt strange that way too. And it was something that it took us all a little bit to get used to.
So if you look at it from a news point of view, and you've been in the media for over a decade, this easily would have been the biggest story that you've had to cover in your career. How did you manage it, like, given the sheer volume of detail that was coming in from a day-by-day basis? Did you kind of try to identify what was most important for the listeners, what was most important for you? I mean, obviously, you're getting huge numbers of cases that were coming in from across the world. There's also the local angles and announcements, not day by day, almost hour by hour.
Yeah, there was a lot of information to digest, and I think I was looking at it, you know, as a journalist from the perspective of, if I turned on the radio, what would I want to hear? And I think I would want to hear what's happening in Brisbane, because they can get all that other information about, you know, global stats and sometimes the national stats from, you know, the TV the TV news, from what they're seeing online, and people were really scoping out what they wanted online, I think. So I think we were providing the need to know information, and it got to a stage where it was like, do we actually need to know this? It was almost like, I feel, not just me personally, but when I started to talk to my friends, my family, you know, people in the community on, you know, direct messaging on Instagram and stuff, I think people were starting to get a little bit of COVID fatigue, is what I called it, because there was just so much information and it was changing so often. And it was almost like, yeah, okay, so how is this going to affect me day to day? So it's just about providing the information that, you know, that affects people day to day within their community. So providing updates on stats within Brisbane, providing information on the, you know, the changes to the restrictions, and then giving a little bit of insight into what's happening nationally and globally, depending on how bad it was. So focusing, unfortunately, on the worst, because that's what news does sometimes, or most of the time. But yeah, it was tricky to manage. And yeah, I think it was just, yeah, as I said, just focusing on localism, because that's sometimes hard to get online, because most of the online publications and also the TVs are focused on national, you know, stats. So yeah, it was a lot. And I certainly did get COVID fatigue. Probably 4 weeks into it, I was like, I'm done. I've had enough.
And then obviously you throw a state election into the mix in there as well, which was sort of bubbling along all year under the surface until it actually had to come to the surface and the election took place. How was that, given that, I guess, if you look back on things, the state leaders around the country, and Anastasia Palaszczuk was probably one of those ones that was, I guess, looked at as someone taking a bit of a hardline stance with the border shutdowns and whatnot. So to have that to sort of look to as well must have made things a little bit more challenging.
Definitely did. In terms of being a journalist too, you're meant to be unbiased, and I was finding I got increasingly frustrated with a lot of media identities in Queensland having their own opinion on what was going on within state politics, and Anastasia Palaszczuk's hard border stance in particular. And I flick on, you know, the AM talk stations, and without even looking at the dial, I could tell what station I was listening to based on how hard they were going on their opinion, which, yeah, I found really frustrating. And I guess that just shows how much emotion fueled the state election here in Queensland. And if I switched on the media like daily and listened, I was convinced that Anastasia Palaszczuk was going to lose. But then when you talked within the community, you would hear that people thought it was, you know, quite wise and reasonable what she was doing. But I think it was just, yeah, it was a really tricky election. And I have quite a few friends that work within state politics, and, you know, from speechwriters to media advisors and stuff. And they found it really hard too, to know when to put the politicians up to speak to the media and when not to, because were they going to get grilled, or were they going to get support that they needed? So it was such a tricky election. And yeah, yeah, it could have gone either way, basically.
So in the midst of the doom and gloom and everything that was going around, you actually, 2020 provided you with some really exciting news on a personal front.
It did, yeah. My fiance and I have been trying for 2 years to fall pregnant, and despite being extremely busy, we got it right and we fell pregnant. My mum says that it's because I wasn't, you know, concentrating on falling pregnant. I was too busy dealing with everything else going on in my life. But yeah, I think everything just came together in terms of some medical issues that we're investigating. And yeah, it was quite the surprise, although there was a couple of months there where, you know, we knew that it was time to start trying again after a few miscarriages. And my partner said to me, it's probably not the right time right now, because who knows what's going to happen with my job? Who knows, you know, what's going to happen with your job? Because there's been, you know, every business has spoken about lots of cuts. So yeah, we decided to hold off, but then yeah, once we knew that our jobs were kind of safe, we thought, let's give it a go. And yeah, finally we fell pregnant, which is awesome. And yeah, we've got a little girl coming in March.
So from I guess a different point of view, how have you found things with the preparation required to bring a child into the world in this day and age under the restrictions that are still, you know, vast and many?
Well, early on, it was very different to what my friends had explained to me. Like, going to the first scan, you weren't really supposed to take a support person with you unless you really, really felt that you had to, and then you had to ask for an exemption, which was tough because we had been through miscarriages, and I thought to myself, hopefully I'm not going to get this news by myself. But yeah, it was definitely strange dealing with the health industry at that time. And yeah, you're having to get your temperature checked. You're being asked, the amount of times I've been asked, have you been overseas or interstate in the last 14 days? Like, it's a question that you just get asked no matter which door you walk into. But all in all, it's been okay, because I guess, you know, restrictions have been eased over time. But I really feel for the women who have given birth during COVID, because they haven't had some of the support mechanisms that they might have had in place there with them on the day. So I guess that is a fear of mine, that we could have another wave of coronavirus. And I hate saying that word, coronavirus. I've said it so many times. And that is a fear that, you know, that might be me, that doesn't have, you know, the midwife that I want, the two midwives that I want in the room with me, and my partner. So, but all in all, you know, now it's not as different as what it was, you know, a few months ago.
Well, given what we've been just discussing there, it seems a little bit silly to ask the next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What are you looking forward to most in 2021?
I'm getting married in July, so my wedding, no, and the birth of our child in March. Yeah, definitely. So it's going to be a big 2021 for me and my fiance. I think I'm crazy planning my own wedding 4 months after having a baby, but hey, I'll walk the streets every single day and hopefully lose that baby weight so I can fit into the dress I've already got.
Ange Anderson, thanks very much for joining us on 2020 Revision.
Thanks, Ralph. Appreciate your time.